Ladies and gentlemen, the NATO summit was really a damn squib. They didn't offer anything more to Ukraine. Russia is not halting attack. It's continuing to push. In fact, Russia is using more lethal missiles in the war zone now than they did the last 1 month. And Biden's visit to Europe has had zero impact. All these developments indicate only one global headline, that the new world order is taking shape, one where America's role is seriously under question.
Russia said it had achieved strategic objectives in Ukraine in phase 1, but the missiles continue to pound Ukraine on a day when Joe Biden is in Poland.
President Joe Biden entering right now. On your screens, that's the entering of President Joe Biden now entering the presidential palace. This is going to be the only important meeting as to see how exactly Poland can directly help Ukraine.
We take Article 5 as a sacred commitment, not a throwaway, a sacred commitment that relates to every member of NATO.
Joe Biden for now says he won't interfere, something that even NATO confirmed over the weekend.
Allies have provided support to Ukraine for several years, and we have stepped up with more military support, financial support, humanitarian support.
US has presence in Poland, but that's as far as they will go for now.
What you see just behind me is the 82nd Airborne Division of the US troop that has been based here in Poland. This is the very troop that's based near a Polish city, which is about 60 miles. On your screens right now, these are images of the 82nd Airborne Division of the US troops.
Joe Biden has attended the NATO meeting. He has visited Poland and even visited refugees.
Hey, no. Oh, no, he's ours. Oh, no. Robert, let him in. Take it.
80 kilometers away from the Poland border, an attack on Lviv. As NATO fails to stop the bombings, Russia is not pulling back.
Пресловутая культура отмены превратилась в отмену культуры. Из концертных афиш вымарывают Чайковского, Шостаковича, Рахманинова. Так запрещаются и русские писатели, и их книги. В последний раз такую массовую кампанию по уничтожению неугодной литературы почти 90 лет назад проводили нацисты в Германии.
Across the world, nations are seeing a rapidly changing order. Saudis are being hit by the Houthis. And North Korea has launched the biggest ever missile in human history. As the war accelerates creation of new blocs, is it the end of the pro-American world order? Let's debate.
And with me this evening, Dov Zakim, former Undersecretary of Defense in the George W. Bush administration and senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies at Washington. I have with us also today Maxim Marteminov. He's managing editor of Holod Media. He's joining us live from Georgia. And we have with us Jitendra Ojha, geopolitical expert. And we have with us from London, John White. He's author and political commentator. And Daria Dugina, political analyst from Moscow. Victor Gao, strategic affairs expert from Beijing. And Syed Mohammad Marandi, who's professor at the University of Tehran. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. Now, every single day, Dov, you know, we get a feeling that besides big talk, the West is beginning to prepare for a changed world order. And every week, more and more people are actually, their stand is becoming either ambiguous or they are moving towards a greater sympathy for Russia. It's quite clear here, NATO is hapless and helpless out here. You know, the US President, UK Prime Minister, whole NATO brigade this week, Dov, they landed in Belgium for this extraordinary session. And this meeting actually served as the perfect blow to this illusion. They could do nothing. They could do nothing, Dov. So are we moving towards a new world order right now? America's role will come under question. Sorry.
Well, a couple of things. First, I totally disagree with you on NATO and the United States. We're destroying the Russian economy. By the way, I am really shocked. It's the only way I can put it, that India which claims to be neutral and sympathetic, at least to the humanitarian crisis, is negotiating a deal with Russia for 12 Su-30 aircraft right now as we speak. I am absolutely shocked. Not only that, the Financial Times, which is not an American newspaper, has said that this is going to be a rupee for ruble deal. Now, come on. You're accusing NATO of being weak? What is India doing? That's number one. Number two, the sanctions have been hurting, and you say Russia's advancing? Russia isn't advancing at all. Not only that, the Ukrainians blew up a Russian ship. They're knocking out Russian tanks. They're knocking out Russian aircraft. I was speaking to a Russian yesterday who said, oh, we control the skies. What nonsense. They're shooting them down. They weren't even supposed to have an air force by now. So please, Arnab, we can disagree, but let's stick to the facts.
Okay, I'll let Daria and others respond to you. I shall only respond to you very briefly to your unnecessary attack on India. I do not understand anymore, and it's becoming frustrating that any discussion regarding this war becomes a discussion on India. Well, I will say it one more time to you, Dove. India is going to take care of India. India is going to look after India's interests. And our economy is growing 3 times the pace or 4 times the pace of the American economy. More and more Americans are living under the poverty line. They are not able to make ends meet, right? And more Indians are rising economically. And please, this is not our war. Dove, you are the ones with the biolabs in Ukraine. You are the ones, you know, Joe Biden's son was doing all kinds of business in Ukraine. You are vested in Ukraine. You are pushing Ukraine. You are encouraging Ukraine. And yesterday, your president went and said, listen, Zelensky, if you want to give up territory, it's your choice. Listen, Zelensky, if you want to break up your country and give a little bit of it to Russia, it's your choice. You have hung the Ukrainians out to dry, Dove, and how dare you question India all the time? You've hung them out to dry.
Well, we've hardly hung them out to dry, considering we're providing them more arms.
You're just saying go fight to the last Ukrainian.
Over $2.5 billion of assistance. How much have you guys given? The whole world considers Mr.
We've given humanitarian aid. It's your war.
Aggressor.
It's your war. We'd rather give them food than weapons. By giving them weapons, you are driving them further down into greater difficulty.
Oh, really? You would rather have the Russians massacre every Ukrainian?
I want Daria to come into this.
All right. I've made my point. You've made yours.
Yes. Thank you. This is very interesting discussion that we have tonight. It shows the 2 different approach for the destiny of countries, as we see it on the example of India, for example, when my American colleague was saying that India has no right to do something. This is the total, exactly the American way of thinking about the world. That some countries, that America thinks that this country can dictate its own rules to the other countries, to India, to Ukraine, to other countries, whenever they are, to Europe. But the thing is that this world order is in the past. Now there is a multipolar world where there are a lot of states. There is Indian bloc civilization, there's Russian civilization, there is European civilizations, there is American civilization, which is also very interesting and very specific. And actually there is no unipolar idea, unipolar world. The world had changed. And what America and United States and the United States government is doing now is trying to do the last battle for this unipolarity. And Mr. Arnab, I thank you for also quoting and mentioning the topic about the biolaboratories. US is not doing this biological epidemiological researches inside America, but it's putting everywhere in the world the points where there are the biolabs which are working on the BL4 level of the importance. So that means that these biolabs are working with quite epidemiological high threats. And the thing is that US is trying to stay in this world order of unipolarity and to dictate to the other states what to do. As they were trying to dictate to Russia. So Russia didn't agree with that, and we made our historical choice. United States tried to dictate how to behave to Ukraine, and it led to the disaster. It caused this catastrophe, and it starts to dictate to Europe how to behave. But this is not possible. The world is multipolar. Every country, every civilizational bloc has its own right for its own policy, and Russians and Americans doesn't have a right to dictate. We need to let the world be multipolar. This is my statement. This is my thoughts.
I think, yeah, absolutely. I want to come to John. John, you know, maybe this is a post-colonial world that, and it's been too many years since the World War II, which the West is not beginning to get accustomed to, and especially given the economic advances of nations, the economic and military advances of nations over the last couple of decades, particularly. I think that what's happening here is that the aspiration of several large and significant countries to be powers in their own right and not part of any bloc is something which the West is not being able to tolerate. Why can it not tolerate that? Why so much intolerance at the thought that perhaps, and you know, we are very inimical to China, and I think China's expansionism is a great danger to many countries, including India. But India, China, Russia, these are large countries. Yeah. They have a long history, and I think the West must reconcile to the way several countries have grown in the last few decades.
Well, indeed, yes. It's the extent to which they are resisting this reality that we are having the crises and chaos all around the world that we are currently living through. And this is indeed a major inflection point in human affairs. We are living in a multipolar world, as Dr. Dugna rightly says, in all but name. And this is the interregnum between the dying of the old world and the coming into being of the new world. Countries such as Russia, they assert the right to have their own foreign policy and their own legitimate security interests taken note of. And that is precisely the problem, because for Western ideologues, the West is a latter-day Roman Empire, and Russia is a latter-day Carthage. And as Cato the Elder, the famed Roman statesman, is said to have said after every speech in the wake of the Second Punic War, Carthago delenda est, Carthage must be destroyed. And if you substitute Russia for Carthage, you get the ideology that's driving this war. From the Kremlin's point of view, this is a defensive war against NATO's eastward expansion. If you look at the NATO map in Eastern Europe, it's a dagger pointed at the heart of Moscow. This war could have been averted, and the escalation, the rhetoric, and the way that this war fever has gripped the West is quite unprecedented. I've never seen anything like it. Any lingering semblance of impartiality and propriety on the part of Western mainstream media outlets has given way to open cheerleading for Ukraine and using Ukraine as a cat's paw, using Ukraine as a proxy to the detriment of the country and to the prolonged suffering of its people. It really is revelatory how this has played out. And we are seeing, as I say, a major inflection point. India, Iran, Russia, China. And, you know, they're trying to say that the Russians are losing this war. Well, let's look at what's happened on a wider level. Iran has received payment of the £400 million debt owed by the British since the 1970s. Russia has established the ruble as an international reserve currency. It's growing closer and drawn deeper ties with China. And there is a sense that the global South understands that the West no longer has the answers to the challenges of the 21st century. And this is accelerating the schism that was already underway between East and West. And I think when this is all over, it's a tragedy for the country, a tragedy for all those people losing their lives. But when this is all over, the world will be in a much better place. That is providing that there is de-escalation and reasoning starts to take place of the war fever that currently has the West in its grip. Indeed, yes. If you look at world history, the prolonged periods of peace and stability have come when there's been a balance of power. The Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, which brought an end to the 30 Years' War, brought in a prolonged period of peace amongst the major nations. There were still small regional conflicts. The Congress of Vienna, after the Napoleonic Wars in 1815, a prolonged period of peace between the major powers up until the First World War. The Versailles Treaty was obviously a Roman peace. That was not a peace treaty that was ever going to do anything other than plant the seeds for the Second World War. The UN Charter and the Cold War. We need a balance of power in our world, and we have to take morality out of politics. We have to understand that the problem that we've had in our world is not, as Western ideologues like to lecture us, the lack of democracy in some states. It's been a lack of democracy between states. And the Western Bloc, since the demise of the Soviet Union, has arrogated more and more rights and power to itself, to the point where national sovereignty is not something that's enshrined in the UN Charter of 1945, but is a gift of Washington to be given and to be taken away on its whim. This is a result of the lack of balance of power, and it's been a carnage since the demise of the Soviet Union, because after that event, the West looked upon the world as a vast banquet upon which it was entitled to feast. And by God, has it feasted. We've just marked the NATO campaign against the former Yugoslavia, specifically Serbia, a 78-day bombing campaign between March and June 1999. Civilian targets targeted, bridges, railways, water processing plants, power plants, even the Chinese embassy. So we'll take no lectures from Western ideologues when it comes to what's going on in Ukraine today. Thank you very much.
Oh, that's very, very lucidly said. You know, Dov and Maxim in Georgia, and maybe Marek wants to come in on this. Maxim, this is the reality. It is a multipolar world, and I think America is well over its heydays. And for countries like Georgia, I'm sure for countries like Ukraine, it is time to realize that just, getting used by America is going to do them no good, because the New World Order cannot be denied anymore. I'm not talking about the morality of the Russian invasion. Don't get me wrong, Maxim. I believe that much of what Russia is doing is morally wrong. The kind of attacks that there have been on civilians, the casualties, is morally wrong. But if you look at a larger perspective, then a pure survey of the world speaks for itself. For example, Assad is visiting the UAE while bin Zayed says that we will bolster Russia. 40 countries did not toe the American line at the UNGA. There is a serious bloc emerging between China and Russia, right? And Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, all deepening ties with Russia. Oil exporting countries, OPEC is with Russia. So America has completely failed to isolate Russia. What does that indicate, Maxim?
Yeah, hello, do you hear me all right?
Yes, very much.
Great. So when we talk about multipolar world, to me it's always been that way. I mean, ever since the end of the Cold War, when bipolar world collapsed, as Soviet Union collapsed, there's been global powers or global blocks in the world that I wouldn't say dictated something to someone. I mean, when we talk about politics, sitting in our comfy homes and offices, there are people dying, people being bombed. Just 2 days ago, a friend of mine, Russian journalist, was killed in Kiev under the Russian bombing. So many of my family live in Ukraine, and they either fled or in shelters. So I wouldn't say U.S. failed in isolating Russia. I can see it is isolated. And when we talk about this block between Russia and China, I can see China as a global power. But even though I am Russian and I'm proud to be Russian, if as a Russian culture, not as a Russian politics. What can Russia actually offer to China? Yes, Russia has oil and natural gas, but what else? Military? I can't see a great success in military invasion of Ukraine by Russia. So what else? Technology? Russia doesn't have any technology. We don't do even microchips for, I don't know, anything. The biggest automobile factory in Russia is now suspend production because it is heavily dependent on electronics, which Russia doesn't produce. What else doesn't Russia produce? Nothing in technology is produced. There were big talks about Russian mobile phones, smartphones, about Russian pads as an iPad. It's only talks. In decades, it's just talks about how great Russia is. But when it comes to reality, we can't produce any sort of technology. Even our military that President Putin is so proud of, well, at least used to be so proud of, with parades on a Victory Day each year, where is it? I'm actually, it's not that I'm ashamed of Russian military. I'm actually, it's just I can't really find a word to say what Russian army is when you see columns of tanks that are not of one kind, so they can't be repaired simultaneously. When you see these stretches of refuel vehicles being bombed by Ukrainians because the supply line is just awfully produced. I can't see Russia as a global power anymore. I think it's in the past.
Your basic point is, Maxim, your basic point is that Russia is very technologically, economically weak, but that doesn't answer my question. The fact of the matter is, on the ground, there are more and more countries which are joining hands with Russia. I mean, that is a fact. I mean, either, let's be clear about it. It may not be because of Russia's strengths. It may equally be, Victor, because nobody is afraid of America anymore. America's heyday is over. America's sphere of influence is being questioned. North Korea is testing ICBMs. Iran has undermined American sanctions. American sanctions have completely and utterly failed against Iran. Am I right? Am I wrong? Mr. Professor Marandi is there in Tehran. He's joining us today.
Yes, I agree completely. And I think we have to keep in mind a point that you mentioned earlier. I, too, am very much against war. When the United States wanted to invade Iraq, I participated in the anti-war rallies in London and in Birmingham, in England, even though I despise Saddam Hussein. But the problem was that the United States did not have the legitimate right to invade Saddam Hussein. So I don't like the war in Ukraine, but we have to keep in mind that the United States has been invading, and NATO countries, country after country, Iraq, Libya, what we're seeing, the genocide in Yemen, the continued occupation of huge parts of Syria. And then, yes, of course, the list goes on. And then on the other hand, when we look at Europe, after the Cold War, there was an opportunity for the whole of Europe to come together. What did the United States do? They lied to the Russians. They said that we won't expand eastwards, and they did. For what purpose? Russia wanted desperately to become a part of Europe. I would say pathetically so. I mean, it was just too much. But still, they tried to undermine Russia. Then as they went eastwards, then the coup in Ukraine, the biolabs, as pointed out, the support for Nazi groups, the same thing that they did in Syria, the same thing that they did in Nicaragua by supporting those Contra-fascists in Nicaragua. They supported ISIS and Al-Qaeda, the same extremist terrorists that now they're supporting in Ukraine. Obviously, all of Ukraine is not Nazi, but neither was Syria. These groups are so vicious that they intimidate the rest of society. So when the United States is constantly invading country after country, when it is trying to provoke countries like Russia or undermine countries like Russia, how in the world do Western countries and NATO countries expect us to have any sympathy for them? And then to get to the final point that you pointed out, when the United States and the Europeans cannot undermine Iran, they failed in their maxim. They targeted women and children with the most brutal sanctions possible. They failed. Look at Iran today. It is growing more powerful by the day, ironically, because of the conflict in Ukraine. Suddenly, everyone is turning to Iran. But they failed to undermine Iran. Do they think they're going to undermine Russia, which is far larger than Iran, which has a larger population than Iran? So the United States and the Europeans, their mentality is still the mentality of the past. They feel that they're exceptional. But the world sees things differently, and the world also sees the United States and the Europeans as not being nearly as strong as they used to be. So I think what is happening is that the United States and the Europeans, by pursuing these policies, they are quickening the relative decline of the Eurocentric global order.
It's happening very fast out here. I completely agree with you. I think look, the number of countries that are actually, taking on this whole American approach. Even Bangladesh, by the way, Dov, even Bangladesh is saying, to hell with all the pressure from America and NATO. We are going to do business with Russia. We are building a nuclear power plant with Russia. We are going to continue to build the nuclear power plant with Russia. We'll do business in nuclear power with Russia. They basically, even Bangladesh has said, to hell with the Americans, to hell with NATO. And doesn't that reflect something, Dov? Everybody is saying that now.
No, it's not everybody, Arnab, and you know it. Look at the vote in the General Assembly again. By the way, this nonsense that we pressured countries to join NATO. Countries ask to join NATO. They ask every time. And I don't know that Iran is getting that much stronger or that much better or that much more economically strong. And if you look at Russia, what's happened already, stock market closes for a month. Ruble is worth what, 15% of what it was not all that long ago? The Russians are begging people to trade in rubles because they can't afford to do anything else. As you already heard, the biggest plant that produces cars in Russia can't do anything because it doesn't have, you know what, the American semiconductors or the European semiconductors. This nonsense. And the biological tests, I mean, what are you talking about here? Nobody seems to be talking about the fact that Russians have invaded Ukraine, that the Ukrainians are begging for more and more equipment, that they are fighting in a way that nobody expected, that they are defending their homeland. You want to take morality out of politics? Fine, take morality out of politics and then go ahead and kill whoever you want to kill. Take over any country that you want. I understand that most countries want to protect their sovereignty. But evidently, there are some people like in Moscow who think
there's a big echo, Anand. You need to fix this.
Absolute nonsense. And I think that it looks like on this particular program, I'm pretty much alone.
Look at Libya. Look at the sanctions on Venezuela.
Professor Marandi knows the situation in Iran better, but let me just tell you this. Today, Dov, I'll tell you, you're very, very frustrated today, very frustrated. And to be honest, if I were in your shoes today, I'd be very frustrated too. I mean, look at how you...
The sanctions have continued. The pressure on Russia continues. The Ukrainians are fighting back. They're blowing up Russian tanks. They're shooting down Russian aircraft. They're blowing up Russian ships. They're destroying Russian facilities. That's not the United States. That's Ukraine. So, look, Arnab, you can look at it the way you want to look at it, but I don't think the reality agrees with you.
Where are you getting all this from? You've been seeing too many American movies.
Not at all. Not in the least. You've been seeing too many Russian movies.
Yeah. Jitendra, I'm coming to you. I was just telling Dov there that he's living in an alternative reality. I just gave him the example of Bangladesh. He refuses to accept it. And Jitendra, clearly the US advantage is waning. But before I come to you, I just want to get Victor into the debate here quite clearly. Victor, the Americans believe everything is going their way. When this is done and dusted, Putin will be out of a job. Russia will see a regime change. China will be diminished. India will coolly and calmly listen to whatever Biden is saying. That's the reality that they are living in. The reality that I live in is where even Iran did not get affected by their sanctions. Yeah, Victor, would you like to come in?
Thank you. Thank you very much. This is Victor Gao. Before I answer your very important question, let me just share my view with my American panelists. Do you know how to deal with a country like India, a great country, a very long civilization, one of the largest populations in the world? Let me share with you my view. Always deal with India with respect. Treat India as an equal. respect India's independence of decision making. Don't try to impose your view onto India. Why? Because the Indian people will simply not accept that, because they are a great people with their own brains, and don't impose your brain onto them. Now, as for the future of the world, I think the future of the world will be multilateral, rallied around the United Nations. And the fact that Russia, China, the United States, UK, and France are the 5 permanent member states of the United Nations Security Council is because of what they did in defeating Nazi Germany in the Second World War and in defeating Japanese fascism in Asia in the Second World War. I think this structure so far has prevented the outburst of another world war. We should be happy about this. I'm worried when I hear President Zelensky mentioning if he cannot meet with President Putin of Russia, there will be the Third World War. We don't want to be hijacked by this kind of threat of a Third World War. Third World War will serve no one's interest. I don't want to see America, China, Russia, United Kingdom, all the NATO member states destroyed in a Third World War. The Third World War will be a nuclear war. Mankind has never been as close to the brink of a nuclear war as we are now. So de-escalate, and de-escalate. The United States need to take the leadership role to de-escalate rather than pouring more fuel on the fire in Ukraine. This so-called sanctions, do the sanctions hurt the Russians? Of course they do. Do you think the sanctions will manhandle Russia down to the ground and force Russia to call uncle? No, never. If you indulge in the fantasy that the sanctions will force Russia to surrender, you completely misunderstand and underestimate the will and the resources of Russia. Russia will kick around, and Russia will be a very important party on the global scene. Allow me to emphasize, there will be no lasting peace in Europe by excluding Russia. There will be no lasting peace in the world by excluding Russia. And on top of that, to exclude Russian culture is a shame, because Tchaikovsky, Dostoevsky, all these guys, all these shining examples, they are not only examples of Russian civilization, they are shining examples of mankind civilization. Let's deal with Russia and the Russian people with respect. If anyone wants to humiliate Russia and humiliate the Russian people, they will do this at their own peril. And Russia will remain one of the 5 permanent member states of the United Nations Security Council. And this is a fact that the United States and all NATO member states need to acknowledge rather than completely disregard. And try to impose sanctions to force Russia to the ground will completely fail miserably.
Jitendra.
Look, Arnav, we are friends of America, and America's democracy we seriously admire. But what has happened over the last few decades, we see that Americans have been committing one after another strategic blunder, and they want their friends to pay. Look, Russia and Iran are our natural allies. We have to live in this region. But they have increasingly pushed these two countries in the orbit of China. After, I have always said on your channel, after disintegration of Soviet Union, there was absolutely no reason for the West to build the kind of pressure they have done on Russia. But right now, imagine what is going to happen. China is going to emerge as a really big behemoth and a big monster kind of power. It has already been troubling virtually everyone in Far East to this part of the world, right up to Africa, and they have gone up to South America. They have gone right up to the backyard of United States. But I don't know why United States is not able to see that. They want to scuttle us. They want to put us under pressure rather than empowering us. If they are genuinely our friends, they should realize that India's and America's interests are very, very critical. We both empower each other. But similarly, we share a relationship with Russia. At this point of time, there is no conflict of interest between Russia and United States. It's just a kind of somebody, a professor from Iran said,
Jitendra, tell me, Jitendra, we all have this, Jitendra, we've had this illusion about America being our steadfast friend. I have no illusions. I'll say it clearly, the Chinese cannot be India's steadfast friends
they have not been.
unless they solve the border dispute with us amicably.
After 9/11 attacks, they have started treating us
allow me
well.
complete. The Americans are not our friends. Tell me one example where, in the context of India, tell me one instance when America has stood by India on a critical issue. One instance. When America has stood by India on an issue that matters to India's national interest.
This is not me. No, Arnab, I have interacted with heads of states and governments in many parts of the world, and they have all said that unfortunate thing is that we rely upon America, and they have always been very patronizing. They've always been and these things have been said by heads of the states and governments, Arnab, in my private capacity, that moment we utter a word, they think we are going against them. But if you are a friend of some country, you should empower that country, you should be empathetic to them, you should be receptive to their interests. Many members of American strategic community, they have been saying, not now, last 5 to 7 years, that American policymakers have to concede one thing, that India and Russia have a very special relationship. There's no conflict if India and US relationship increases or improves. And this has started only, Arnab, after 9/11. Till 9/11, virtually every American Secretary of State has been referring to Pakistan-sponsored terrorism in Kashmir as kind of freedom struggle. They have been promoting all shades of organized crime in name of Islam. Only when it started hitting them, they shifted their position. But this is what we would like our American friends to realize.
I think Jitendra, the fault of American foreign policy, which is coming to bear upon it, and I want to go back to John on this, is the fact that they do not have a strategic view of the world. They have tactical and transactional relationships, and I forget the exact phrase which John used when he referred to, sort of sharing the spoils, John, of the post-World War II era. They had it too good for too many years. And I think that period is coming to an end. You kept referring to the word, John, inflection point. Besides, if Ukraine had not happened, would the world order have changed anyway?
Well, as I said in my previous remarks, the world was going through this schism between East and West, but in a gradualist way. China's growing economic footprint and with it geopolitical heft. Russia's strategic assertiveness, its operation in Syria was a game changer, and that was a military success. So the world was changing. Unfortunately, we're having to go through this conflict as an acceleration point in that change. And may I just make the point about the conflict, because I am not cheerleading any conflict, but it's incumbent on all right-thinking people to get to the roots of any conflict, to get to the causes, so we can try and avert. And the cause of this conflict is undeniably Western aggression towards Russia in the form of NATO expansion eastward, as another one of your guests rightly said, Mr. Morandi, in defiance of pledges that were given to the Gorbachev government, the last Soviet premier, in the wake of the demise of the Soviet Union and in the process of the reunification of Germany. But here's the thing. Mr. Zelensky was elected in 2019 on a huge mandate, 73% majority, pledging to restore ceasefire between Ukrainian forces and the breakaway separatist republics in the Donbass. And he also pledged to implement the conditions of the Minsk 1 and 2 agreements of 2014-2015. He failed to do that. He actually reversed and he resigned from that, and he became more Catholic than the Pope in his anti-Russia stance. And I strongly suspect that he has been whipped into control by neo-Nazis within Ukraine's political and security establishment, and also externally has been put under pressure by Washington, who insist on using Ukraine as a cat's paw against Russia. That is the proximate causes of this conflict.
I totally agree with you about things being far more complicated than just white hat, black hat. But if Russian military is liberating Mariupol, why is it bombing it? Why civilian houses are being bombed? Because of neo-Nazis stationed there?
The Azov battalion have been deploying in residential buildings, upper floors of residential buildings.
How big is Azov battalion?
And the Russian forces are... Sorry? Pardon?
How big is Azov battalion? How many people?
It has about, I believe it has 900 soldiers, volunteers.
So it's only 900 men in Mariupol holding it, and so Russian.
Well, it's not only the Azov battalion, but they are leading the resistance in Mariupol, and they're doing so using civilians as human shields, and that is coming from residents.
What is Ukrainian neo-Nazis? Who are they?
Well, these are people who hold to the view. Well, let me talk about that. There is undoubtedly a problem with Nazi ideology in Western Ukraine that goes all the way back to the Second World War, where there was mass collaboration with the Nazis because they saw the Nazis as liberators from Stalin and Soviet communism. The same with the Baltic states. So, as I was saying, their national hero, Stepan Bandera, was a fascist and a Nazi collaborator. And so this unresolved history is playing into this conflict today. And those who don't learn the lessons from the past are doomed to repeat them. And that's the problem. And so there is an unresolved history of collaboration with the Nazis. There was a specially constituted Ukrainian SS battalion formed in 1941, the 1st Galicia, and there was 35,000 volunteers in the Ukrainian auxiliary police, which was established by Heinrich Himmler in 1941. And they were responsible for the atrocity of Babi Yar in 1941, when 30,000 Ukrainian Jews were slaughtered just outside Kiev in the course of 1 week. It was the single largest atrocity. That's absolutely true. That's verifiable. That's verifiable. Ukrainian auxiliary police under the command of the SS.
The firing squads were German.
No, they were under the command of the German. Ukrainian auxiliary police.
Collaborators were everywhere in Europe, in occupied territories. Everywhere.
Yeah, but not to the extent they were in Eastern Europe.
And
not to the extent they were in
Estonia, France, Belgium.
Not to the same extent.
Whatever our differences of perspective are,
as they were in Eastern Europe.
Whatever our differences of perspective are here, if I can go back, if I can just take you back for a minute. My question is this. We started with the point of whether we are moving towards a new world order. It's quite clear to me, Victor, that the intent here, at least on the Russian side, is to create or facilitate the establishment of a new world order. It's quite clear to me that Iran feels the same way. It's quite evident to me that even India feels the same way. At least Indians, a lot of Indians feel the same way. It is quite clear to me that the Chinese feel the same way. It's quite clear to me that a lot of people who are being referred to here as the global south feel the same way, that things need to change. In that case, since that is the intent of Putin, how far is this war now going to go in your view? Victor, that was to you.
Question 2.
Thank you. First of all, I think what China looks at is the international order centering around the United Nations with multilateral structures for the world. And every country will be an equal party in the world to be respected in its own capacity. China does not want to have a world order to be dictated by any single big country. No country in the world should pretend to be God and force others to be its disciples. And that will really be a very distorting and discerning world. And China does not want to be a part of that kind of world to be dictated by any single superpower. China wants to embrace multilateralism centering around the United Nations. And I think that's a better world order, and that's a world order where every country, big or small, will be able to exercise their own independence of judgment and be their own masters, rather than being forced to be running dogs of any big single superpower in the world.
Yeah, but what happens to this present war, Daria? I mean, is Russia going to stop at a point where it feels that it has achieved its territorial objectives, maybe to redraw the map of Ukraine?
Yes, I'm listening attentively. Thanks. Yeah. The question where it will stop lies actually in the presidential, on the Russian presidential intention to stop it when the Ukraine will be denazified and demilitarized. So this is two aims of Russia, which is providing. Actually, my colleague, I don't know even can I call him colleague, who is in Georgia now, and maybe possibly soon he will leave and move to America, with which intentions he is more in accordance than with Russian point of view. I will just remind two things. That first of all, I invite you to visit the International Forum of Army
not Russia, but your own.
2020. Yes, I have, because I'm a Russian patriot. I love my country. So I think you are open to the debates and you are open to changing your positions. And for the operation, what is very important now to note is the recent declaration of the Russian Minister of Defense. So that's according to Mr. Representative for the Ministry of Defense, Mr. Konchenkov, the operation in Ukraine is carried out strictly according to the approved plan. So the absolute priority is to avoid unnecessary losses among civilians. So Russia is doing the high point hits as it was in the beginning. All the things I wanted also to note, the facts which are usually used by our American colleagues or the European media, they need to be fact-checked. This is very important because if in geopolitics, if in geography, we are now passed to the multipolar world and we understand that, we have also one important thing to speak about is the sovereignty of the media. Because as we know, the conflict now is largely invaded by the fakes, and the American, for example, central media are now not doing exactly the fact-checkings. It's absolutely understandable because when there is the conflict, when there is a lot of news, that's not very easy to check what is going on on the region, especially if they don't have their own correspondents. But when we say something, even as it was mentioned by my colleague, about the bombing by Russia of civilians, of the residences, please, let's speak precisely. Where, when, what concretely? And please, we need to understand the context. That the thing is that the battalions of neo-Nazi groups and Ukrainian army as well was using, as it was using in Syria, the residences of civilians in order to install their own basements. And it was the same with the Mariupol theater. So we need to understand that every news, every fact has to be checked. And we need to understand that if we come to the multipolarity in the geopolitical sphere, in the political sphere, then we need to be very attentive also in the media. And here it's also the importance of the debates and of the analysis, strict analysis of the facts. Because this is not correct to say Russia is bombing civilians, or for example, even US is bombing civilians.
Yeah, I think another aspect. I think another aspect which comes out. Yeah, I think another aspect which comes out, and I think I had mentioned this very clearly, Daria, when I had come to Moscow at a Russia Today conference, that the role of the media also becomes very clear because there's been a lot of brainwashing, Jitendra, especially over the last 5 or 6 decades, where one section of the media, there's been complete hegemony of the media from the West, and that has been fed to the world, and that is why people, even in America, disbelieve the fact that there is an alternative view. I mean, we are talking here about the de-dollarization of the world. We are talking about, rupee, ruble exchanges. We are talking about the yuan being used perhaps as the currency for oil transactions. We are talking about even Venezuela setting terms for America. And if you ever were to tell an American this, he would look at you and his jaw would drop. He wouldn't believe it because they've been brainwashed. And that's why I'm finding it increasingly difficult to get across to the Americans and explain to them that perhaps their understanding of what is happening in Ukraine is completely flawed. It's the kind of understanding that's a CIA-fed understanding. And the American media has plain vanilla played that, escalated it. It's embedded journalism of the worst kind. And I think the Americans are not seeing what's coming next, Jitendra. I know you feel that we have a good relationship with America. Yes, we do. We should continue to have. But the Americans are not seeing what's about to come. I am clearly seeing, Jitendra, a great change in the global order within the next 12 months, without a doubt. And I think the long term, the recalibration of the global order is also the only way for India to get its due, to be a member of the Security Council, to have its due as a major player in the global order. Jitendra.
Yes, America has to realize that issue at stake is not America's ascendance over the rest. The issue at stake, you pointed it out, has to be a better world, a safer world where people across all these divides can grow. But I feel American strategic thinkers are obsessed with this Cold War mentality, unipolarity and things like this. Once we consider them as leaders of democratic world, certainly there has been a change in their position since 2001. But one thing for India, when they come to deal with India, I'm very glad one of the panelists said that we have a very long history. Yes, because of our humanism, pacifism, two forces have managed to trouble us. But at this point of time, we have been a voice of sanity. We have been having a moral power when we spoke about all the post-colonial democracies and all the downtrodden people. But right now, they have to see that we need a world order where everyone can stay, everyone can thrive, and it's not about domination of one race over the another. And from this point of view, we are a democracy. We have sustained democracy under most adverse circumstances. West as well as America, especially America, they have to respect this thing because democracy is inbuilt in our values. It is inbuilt. Humanism is inbuilt in our values. That is not the case with two forces who are somehow confronting us. We would still like best of relationship with them. But at this point of time, America has to change its way of leadership and America has to empower India. It has to be more receptive, not only to India, I would say entire world.
Well, it's going to be very interesting next 1 month. I hope the conflict ends. But clearly, this war is the point where things begin to change globally. I don't see the war ending, but I know that when it ends, the world is not going to be the same again. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That was fantastic. And viewers, with a promise to see you on Monday at 9. That's it for tonight. Good night and goodbye.